Please, please, somebody help me. He's been following me since the subway. He tried to grab me. Please. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he was. She only knew he was the only person in that dark, rain-soaked park who didn't run, who stood up, stepped forward, and put himself between her and the man with the knife without a single second of hesitation. One crack of bone, one quiet order, and the threat vanished into the night like it had never existed. He saved her daughter in 4 seconds flat. What he asked for in return would change everything. If this story already has you gripping your seat, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me because you will not believe what happens next. Lauren Hale had been staring at the same paragraph for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 minutes because she checked the clock on her laptop at 10:34 and again just now at 10:45. And in that stretch of time, she hadn't added a single word to the legal deposition she was supposed to have finished 2 hours ago. The document sat open on her screen, dense Spanish legalese that she was paid to convert into dense English legalese, and her eyes kept sliding off the words like they were coated in oil. Her phone was in her hand. It had been in her hand for the last 40 minutes. Emma was supposed to be home by 9:30. It was now 10:47. Lauren dialed again, third time. It rang twice and rolled a voicemail. Emma's cheerful, recorded voice saying she'd call back as soon as she could, which was a lie her daughter told with the best of intentions, because Emma was 15 and forgetful, and almost certainly fine. Her phone had probably died. That was the sensible explanation. Phones died. Teenagers forgot to charge them. Lauren knew this. She had translated legal documents in 3 languages for 9 years, and she was a rational, reasonable woman. And she knew that the most likely explanation for her daughter's silence was a dead battery and nothing else. She dialed again. Voicemail. Emma. Lauren's voice came out steadier than she felt. It's Mom. I need you to call me back the second you hear this. I'm not angry. I'm not upset. I just need to know you're okay. Call me. She paused. Please. She set the phone face up on the kitchen counter and stared at it for 3 seconds. Then she grabbed her jacket. It wasn't much of a jacket, a thin cotton thing she'd bought on clearance 2 winters ago that did almost nothing against actual cold, but it was what she had. She shoved her phone into the pocket, her keys into the other, and she was out the door before she'd consciously decided to leave. The elevator in their building was broken again. It had been broken for 6 weeks, and the landlord had stopped returning her calls about it. So she took the stairs, 5 flights down in the dark because the bulb on the 4th floor landing had blown out and nobody had replaced it. And she hit the street at a near run, even though she had no plan and no idea where to start looking. The Bronx in November at 10:48 at night was a specific kind of place. Lauren had lived here for 3 years, since the divorce, since the money had run out and the options had narrowed down to this block, in this building, in this life. She knew these streets. She'd walked them 1,000 times with her keys laced between her fingers like makeshift claws, moving with the kind of practiced confidence that was mostly performance and partly prayer. She knew which corners to avoid and which bodegas stayed open late and which men standing outside them would leave her alone if she kept her eyes forward and her pace steady. She knew all of this, and it didn't help at all, because Emma was out here somewhere and Lauren couldn't feel anything except the particular cold of a mother's dread, the kind that doesn't respond to reason. She headed north. The library where Emma's free tutoring program met on Thursday nights was 12 blocks up. Emma would have taken the 6 train and gotten off at Pelham Parkway, which put her on a straight shot south toward home. That was the route. That was where Lauren was going to walk until she found her daughter, or her legs gave out. The rain started on the 3rd block. Not a drizzle, not the polite kind of rain that builds slowly and gives you time to find shelter. This was an immediate, furious downpour, the November kind that felt personal, that soaked through Lauren's useless jacket in approximately 30 seconds and plastered her blonde hair flat against her skull. She didn't stop. She pulled her collar up, which did nothing, and kept walking. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she grabbed it so fast she nearly dropped it on the wet sidewalk. Unknown number. She answered anyway. Hello? Emma? Static. Then silence. Then the call dropped. Lauren stood in the rain staring at her phone. She tried calling back and got nothing. She stood there for another 3 seconds. Just 3, and then she started walking again, faster this time, because standing still was not something she could make herself do. By the time she reached the park, she was running. Pelham Park at 11 at night in a rainstorm was almost completely dark. The city had been replacing streetlights and stages for 2 years, and they hadn't gotten to this section yet, which meant the only light came from the few lamps that still worked, casting sick yellow circles on the wet pavement, and from the dim glow of the city beyond the tree line. Lauren came in through the east entrance because it was the most direct route from the subway stop, and she was scanning every shadow, every bench, every covered structure. She saw the pavilion, and she saw the figure sitting in it. A man, alone, seated on one of the center benches with a kind of absolute stillness that didn't belong to someone sheltering from rain. The kind of stillness that belonged to someone who was entirely comfortable exactly where he was, as though the rain and the dark and the empty park were all specifically arranged for his convenience. Lauren was 50 feet away. She registered certain things automatically, expensive clothing, even in this light, the quality of his coat, the way he sat, not hunched, not reactive, just present. She also registered that he was large and male and a stranger, and every instinct she developed over 3 years of navigating this neighborhood told her to give him a wide berth. She was already turning away when she heard it. Footsteps, running, splashing hard through puddles, and the sound was coming from the north path, the path from the subway, and she knew that rhythm before she saw anything, knew it the way you know your own heartbeat, and then she heard the voice. Please, please, someone help me, please. Emma. Lauren moved. She couldn't have said later what her body did in those first seconds. She was 50 feet from the pavilion, and then she was 20, and then she was 10, and Emma had already reached the man on the bench, had already thrown herself toward him the way you throw yourself toward the only light you can find when you're drowning in the dark. Her daughter's voice was wrecked with terror, high and cracking on every word. That man, he's been following me since the subway. He tried to grab my arm. Please, please help me, please. The man stood. Lauren registered this in fragments. The height of him, the way he rose without urgency, as though the situation was already concluded in his mind, and all that remained was execution. He placed himself between Emma and the entrance to the pavilion with one step, one deliberate, claiming step, and the voice that came out of him was quiet enough that Lauren almost couldn't hear it over the rain, but it carried like a blade. Stay behind me. The man who'd been following Emma came up the pavilion steps 30 seconds later. He was bigger than Lauren had expected. The hoodie he wore was soaked through, and his face was in shadow, but his posture was all forward momentum, all entitlement, the body language of someone who had decided the situation was his. He stopped when he saw the man standing between him and Emma, stopped and recalculated. She's with me, the man in the hoodie said. His voice had an angry edge covering something uglier. Step aside. No. One word. The seated man, standing now, didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. He just said the word the way you state a fact about the weather. No emotion, no performance, just absolute certainty. You don't know what you're getting into. The man in the hoodie shifted his weight. This doesn't have to be your problem. It already is. The hoodie man's hand went to his pocket, and Lauren, who was still moving, who had been crossing the last 30 feet at a dead run, saw the metal catch the light from the nearest lamp. A knife. She opened her mouth to scream and no sound came out. What happened next took 4 seconds. She counted them later, replaying it compulsively, trying to make sense of the geometry of it. The man in the hoodie lunged. The standing man moved. Not away, not back, but forward and inside, like he'd been waiting for exactly this action and had already planned his response before the other man's muscles had finished deciding to move. His hand closed around the wrist, holding the knife. There was a sound, sharp and final, a crack that carried even through the rain, and the hoodie man screamed. The knife hit the concrete, and then there were 2 other men in the pavilion who hadn't been there a moment before. Dark suits, completely dry, moving with the silent coordination of people who had done exactly this kind of thing before, many times, in many places. They took the hoodie man by his arms before he'd finished processing that he was screaming, and he looked at them and something went out of his face. The entitlement, the aggression, replaced by something much more primal. "Please," he said. The word came out cracked and small. The standing man looked at him without expression. "Take him somewhere quiet." He said it to the 2 men in suits, not to the attacker. "Have a conversation with him about his choices tonight." "I didn't mean, I wasn't going to. I'm not interested in your intentions." The standing man's voice dropped another register. "You terrified a child. You'll answer for it." The 2 men walked the attacker out of the pavilion and into the rain and the dark, and Lauren never saw him again. She had reached the steps. Her legs carried her up and across the pavilion floor, and Emma turned, finally turned, and saw her. "Mom!" The word came out broken in 3 different places, and Emma crossed the distance between them, and Lauren caught her daughter who was soaking wet and shaking so hard Lauren could feel it in her own bones. And she held on with both arms and didn't let go. "I'm here." Lauren's voice wasn't working right. She pressed her face into Emma's wet hair and said it again. "I'm here. I've got you. You're okay." "Mom, I'm so sorry. My phone died and I didn't see him until he was already following me, and he wouldn't stop and I didn't know where to go." "Shh, you're okay. You found help." Lauren pulled back just enough to look at her daughter's face, running her hands over Emma's cheeks, her shoulders, checking with the automatic, desperate thoroughness of a mother making sure the damage is survivable. "Did he hurt you? Did he touch you?" "He grabbed my arm, just for a second. I pulled away and ran." "You're okay." Lauren said it like a fact she was deciding into existence. "You're okay." Over Emma's shoulder, she met the eyes of the man who'd stood up. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark hair, slightly disheveled from the rain. The first thing about him that suggested the storm had touched him at all. Sharp features and darker eyes, and a face that was, in a technical sense, handsome, and in every other sense, entirely unreadable. He was looking at her the way she was looking at him, measuring, cataloging, trying to understand what exactly they were dealing with. He reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket and produced a handkerchief. Folded, white, somehow pristine. He held it out to Emma. "For your face," he said simply. Emma took it with shaking hands. She pressed it to her eyes and cheeks and then looked at it as though she couldn't quite process that it was real. "Thank you." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry I bothered you. I just saw you sitting there and I thought—" "You thought correctly." He looked back at Lauren. "Where do you live?" Every stranger danger instinct Lauren possessed fired at once. She stood there soaking wet, holding her trembling daughter, in a dark park at nearly 11 at night, and a man she just watched break another man's wrist with one hand was asking her where she lived. "Close," she said. Something that might have been patience crossed his face. "I'm not asking for reasons that concern you. I'm asking because it's raining and you have no coat and your daughter is in shock and I'd like to see you home safely." "We can manage." "I'm sure you can." He wasn't arguing. He wasn't pressing. He was simply stating his intention in a tone that made it clear the conversation was a courtesy, not a negotiation. "I'm offering anyway." Emma's hand found Lauren's arm. Her grip was hard and small and still shaking. Lauren looked at her daughter and looked at the man and looked at the rain hammering the pavilion roof. "5 blocks south," she said, "near Morrison." He nodded once and then removed his coat. Dark wool, the kind of quality that Lauren recognized, even through exhaustion, as costing more than 2 months of her rent, and draped it over Emma's shoulders without ceremony. Emma looked startled. He looked at Lauren. "Ready?" The 5 blocks passed mostly in silence. The rain had pulled back to a heavy drizzle, which was marginally better for Lauren's visibility, but did nothing for the cold that had settled into her joints. Emma walked between them, buried in the man's coat, which pooled around her feet. She'd stopped shaking as violently, but she was still pressed close to Lauren's side, still processing. Halfway home, Emma looked up at him. "What's your name?" He glanced down. Something shifted in his face, not warmth exactly, but the memory of it. "Dominic Caruso. I'm Emma Hale." She paused. "This is my mom, Lauren." "Lauren Hale." His eyes moved to her briefly. It wasn't a question. He was filing it away. "Thank you," Lauren said, because she'd been saying it in her head for 5 blocks and needed to say it out loud. "What you did back there, I don't have words for it." "Then don't look for them. That man had a knife. You could have—" The situation resolved itself. He said it the way you'd say the meeting ran long, factual, unremarkable. Lauren looked at him sideways. That's not how normal people talk about someone coming at them with a knife. He didn't answer that, which was, she thought, an answer in itself. Their building came into view. Lauren saw it the way she always saw it when she'd been away. The cracked facade, the cardboard covering the second-floor window someone had broken 2 months ago and never replaced. The graffiti on the doorframe that the landlord had promised 3 times to paint over. She saw Dominic take it in with those dark eyes of his, and she felt the familiar heat of shame and pushed it down hard. "This is us," she said. She fumbled for her keys and got the door open, and Emma was already halfway through it, gravitational pull towards safety and warmth overriding everything else. Lauren turned back. "Thank you," she said again. "Really, I don't know how to. I can't repay. No repayment necessary." He reached into his jacket and produced a card. Small, white. He held it out. "Take this. If you have trouble, any kind of trouble, call that number." Lauren took it. One side, a phone number. Nothing else. No name, no business, no title. Just 10 digits embossed in black on white. "I don't understand." "You don't need to, not tonight." He glanced past her to Emma, who was standing in the doorway still wrapped in his coat. "Keep it for now. You can return it when you're ready." "It's too expensive. I can't." "I insist." His voice didn't change, but the conversation was over. She could feel it. He looked at her one more time, that cataloging look, that measuring quality she couldn't quite decode, and then he said, "Lock your door. Check your windows. This neighborhood isn't what it should be." "I know," Lauren said quietly. He nodded once, turned, walked back into the drizzle without another word. Lauren stood on the steps, watching him disappear, and realized her hands were shaking, not from cold. Inside, Emma was already shedding her wet shoes in the hallway, the expensive coat folded over her arm with a reverence she usually reserved for things she was afraid to break. She looked up at Lauren with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted, and still carrying the leftover electricity of real terror. "Mom," she said, "I know." Lauren got the door locked and the chain thrown, and then she pulled her daughter against her again, right there in the entryway, both of them still damp and cold. "I know." "Who is he?" Lauren didn't answer right away. She was looking at the card in her hand. White, plain, anonymous in every way except the certainty it carried. The absolute confidence of someone who had no need to explain themselves. The kind of certainty you earned or inherited. The kind that had nothing to do with ordinary life. "I don't know," she said finally. Emma pulled back, looked at her seriously. "He saved my life, Mom. I know that too." "He seemed dangerous," Emma paused. "But the good kind. Is that stupid?" Lauren looked at the card one more time. Then she tucked it into her wallet behind her driver's license, in the slot where she kept the things she needed to find quickly. "No," she said, "it's not stupid." She steered Emma toward the bathroom, and the warm water, and the dry clothes waiting on the other side of this night. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up." She didn't tell Emma what she was thinking. She didn't say that she'd been standing in that park watching a man disarm an armed attacker with the calm efficiency of someone filing paperwork, and that the two other men had appeared from nowhere, like they'd been pre-positioned there, and that when Dominic Caruso had told them to take the attacker somewhere quiet, neither of them had hesitated or asked where, or looked even slightly surprised by the instruction. She didn't say any of that. She helped Emma into the shower and made tea, and sat on the couch with her daughter wrapped in blankets and Gabriel's coat draped over the chair back like a flag planted in their living room. She sat there after Emma fell asleep, and she took the card back out of her wallet. She looked at it for a long time. Whatever Dominic Caruso was, whatever world those dark suits and that particular stillness and those pre-positioned men actually came from, he had put himself between her 15-year-old daughter and a knife without a second's hesitation. He had walked them home in the rain. He had given Emma his coat and her a number to call. Just in case. She put the card back, turned off the lamp, sat in the dark listening to Emma breathe, and the neighbor upstairs arguing with someone, and the city doing what cities did at midnight when decent people were trying to sleep. She told herself she would never call it. She told herself that twice more before she finally fell asleep. By Saturday morning, she had already called it. She told herself she would never call it. She told herself that on Friday morning, while she made instant coffee with hands that still weren't entirely steady. And she told herself that again while she sat beside Emma on the couch, watching her daughter pretend to eat toast. And she told herself that a third time while she opened her laptop and typed Dominic Caruso into the search bar. What came back was almost aggressively ordinary. Caruso Group Holdings, a real estate company with a professional website, clean photography, buildings listed across Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn. Caruso Provisions, an import company specializing in Italian wine, olive oil, specialty foods, with a contact page and a list of wholesale accounts that included restaurants Lauren recognized. A few mentions in business journals, a charity gala photo from 3 years ago, Dominic in a dark suit standing near a table of well-dressed strangers, his expression the same unreadable, careful blankness she'd seen in the park. Nothing about men who appeared from shadows with dry suits in the middle of rainstorms. Nothing about wrists snapping in 4 seconds flat. Nothing about people being taken somewhere quiet to answer for their choices. She closed the laptop. "You looked him up." Emma was watching her from the couch, still wrapped in the blanket, still holding her mug with both hands. "I was curious. What did you find?" "A businessman," Lauren paused. "On paper." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, "But not actually." "I don't know what actually." Lauren picked up her own mug, found it empty, set it back down. "And I'm not sure it matters right now. What matters is that you're here and you're safe, and we don't have to think about Dominic Caruso again." Emma looked at her with 15-year-old certainty. "You already put the card somewhere you won't lose it." Lauren didn't answer that. Friday crawled past them like it had somewhere better to be, and resented the obligation. Emma didn't go to school. Lauren didn't work. Or she tried to work, opened 3 different documents, closed all 3 without adding a word. They moved around each other in the small apartment with the particular careful tenderness of 2 people who had looked at something terrible and were still processing that it hadn't touched them. Every siren outside made Emma flinch. Every raised voice from the floor above made Lauren's jaw tighten. By Friday night, Lauren had reorganized the kitchen cabinets twice, which was what she did when she needed to do something with her hands and her brain wouldn't cooperate. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray, and Lauren decided that what they both needed was normalcy, groceries, a reason to move through an ordinary task in an ordinary way, and remind themselves that most of the world was just the world and not a park pavilion in the rain. "I'll be 30 minutes, she told Emma. "Lock the deadbolt. Don't open it for anyone." "Mom, I'm 15. "Lock the deadbolt." Emma locked it. Lauren heard the bolt slide home through the door and felt some of the tightness in her chest ease by a fraction. She went down the 5 flights and out into the November cold with her reusable shopping bags and her list and the specific determination of a woman performing normalcy for her own benefit. The corner grocery was 4 blocks away. She moved through it on autopilot. Bread, milk, eggs, the pasta that was on sale, the cheaper brand of pasta sauce because the better brand was 60 cents more, and 60 cents was 60 cents. She was in the checkout line with her basket when the sound hit her. 4 shots, flat and rapid, one after another, close enough that the second one overlapped the echo of the first. The store went silent for a single, suspended second. That collective pause of disbelief, the moment where every brain in the room tried to find an alternative explanation and couldn't. And then someone screamed and the spell broke, and Lauren was already on the floor with everyone else, basket overturned, cans rolling, her phone out and dialing before she'd consciously decided to move. Emma picked up on the first ring. "Mom!" Her daughter's voice was high and thin and terrified. "Mom, are you okay? There were loud noises and something hit the window. Get away from the windows." Lauren was already crawling toward the front of the store, keeping low, scanning the entrance. "Right now, Emma, bathroom. Bathtub. Lock the door and get in the tub and stay there. I'm coming home. I'm 2 minutes away." "Mom, I'm scared." "I know. Tub. Now. Go." She ran. She didn't think about the groceries she'd left scattered across the checkout floor. She didn't think about the shots she just heard, or whether whoever had fired them was still out there. She thought about Emma and the thin walls of their apartment and the specific vulnerability of a 15-year-old girl alone on the 4th floor, and her legs moved and kept moving. The building looked intact from outside. That was the first thing she checked, an involuntary full-body assessment, scanning the facade, looking for damage. The 2nd floor window that had been covered with cardboard now had the cardboard blown partially off. Glass on the sidewalk below it that hadn't been there this morning. She took the stairs 3 at a time. "Emma." She was through the door before she'd finished unlocking it, voice raised, moving fast toward the bathroom. "Emma, I'm here." In here, small and tight and trying so hard to sound calm. Lauren pushed the bathroom door open and found her daughter in the bathtub, exactly as instructed. Knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around them, her phone clutched in one hand. Unhurt, physically, completely unhurt. Lauren crossed the floor in 2 steps and pulled her up and held on. And then she saw the window. The small, frosted glass bathroom window that faced the street. The one that Emma had probably been standing in front of 30 seconds before the shooting started. It had a hole in it now. A neat, round hole surrounded by a spiderweb of cracks. The kind of hole a bullet made when it passed through glass. Lauren stood very still with her arms around her daughter, looking at that hole, doing the math she didn't want to do. If Emma had been standing there, if she'd gone to the window when she heard the noise instead of away from it, if 30 seconds had gone differently. "Mom," Emma's voice was muffled against her shoulder. "What's happening? What was that?" "I don't know." Lauren's voice was completely steady. She had no idea how. "But we're going to be okay." She believed that for about 4 more seconds. Then her eyes went back to the hole in the window, and the belief got much harder to sustain. Her phone was already in her hand. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of pride, 3 seconds of, I can handle this. 3 seconds of, we don't need anyone. And then she opened her wallet and found the card. She dialed. He answered before the second ring. Yes. One word, calm and flat and entirely unsurprised, like he'd been sitting somewhere waiting for this specific call. This is Lauren Hale. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. You helped my daughter last Thursday night, in the park. I know who you are. No pause, no recalibration, just, what's wrong? There was a shooting on our street, about 10 minutes ago. A bullet came through our bathroom window. She stopped, started again. I don't know what to do. I don't know who else to call. There was a brief silence, not hesitation. She got the impression that Dominic Caruso didn't hesitate, that what looked like pauses in other people were in him something more like decisions being made at speed. Where are you right now? Home, bathroom. Emma's with me, she's not hurt. Stay there, don't go near the windows. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He paused for exactly 1 beat. You did the right thing calling. The line went dead. Lauren looked at her phone, then at Emma, who was watching her with the expression of someone trying to determine whether to feel relieved or more frightened. Is he coming? He's coming. Is that good? Lauren thought about the park, about the way Dominic had stepped in front of a knife without his heartbeat appearing to change, about the card with no name and no title that she'd been carrying for 2 days, like a talisman she wasn't sure she believed in. I think so, she said. Right now, I think so. He arrived in 13 minutes. She heard the knock, firm, measured, the exact opposite of Ryan's drunken pounding that she still sometimes heard in her sleep, and opened the door to find Dominic in different clothes than Thursday night, but the same absolute presence. 3 men behind him in dark suits, all of them moving with that particular alertness she was starting to recognize as his version of normal. He stepped inside without ceremony and looked at her first. You're both uninjured. Yes. Show me the window. She led him to the bathroom. He examined the hole in the glass in silence, angling his head to trace the trajectory, and whatever he saw caused his expression to go progressively darker in a way that was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. One of his men was already on the phone. Another was moving through the rest of the apartment, checking angles at each window, and Lauren watched him do it and thought, these men have done this before, many times, in many places. Sit down, Dominic said. He'd come back into the living room, and his voice was very calm in a way that made her skin prickle. Both of you. They sat on the couch. He pulled the kitchen chair over and sat facing them. His men took positions without being told. This wasn't random. He said it the way he said everything, as a fact, not an opinion. There's been a territorial dispute building in this area for 6 weeks. 2 organizations claiming the same distribution corridor. Today was the first direct engagement. It won't be the last. Lauren stared at him. How do you know that? His eyes met hers. Because I know who controls what in this city, and I know when those controls are being challenged. A pause. This neighborhood is going to get significantly worse before it stabilizes, possibly within the next week. Emma's hand found Lauren's. Her grip was hard. What do we do? You leave. Simple. Immediate. You can't stay here. We can't afford to move. Lauren heard the words come out of her mouth and hated them. Hated the naked practicality of them. Hated that this was the reality she was operating inside. I work every hour I'm not sleeping to make rent on this apartment. I have maybe $200 in savings. Moving isn't something I can just... What if it was? He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and the gesture made him look for a moment almost human. What if moving wasn't something you had to figure out alone? She looked at him. What does that mean? I own a building in the West Village, residential units on the lower floors, Housing I keep for employees and business associates. There's a 2-bedroom apartment vacant right now. Furnished, secure building, good neighborhood. He paused. You could live there. The silence stretched for 5 full seconds. I can't afford West Village, Lauren said carefully. You'd work for it, not charity, an actual exchange. He reached into his jacket and produced a folder. Caruso Provisions imports from Italian suppliers. Wine, olive oil, specialty foods, textiles. The contracts and correspondence run through Italian and Spanish legal frameworks. My current translator retired last month. He looked at her steadily. You speak both languages at a professional level. How do you know that? I looked you up, the same way you looked me up. The corner of his mouth moved by approximately 2 millimeters. $3,000 a month plus the apartment as employment compensation. Health insurance after 90 days. Real work, real pay, above board. 3,000. The same grinding, impossible number she currently made working herself to exhaustion every hour of every day. Plus housing, plus safety, plus not lying awake counting the seconds between Emma getting home from school and the moment she could confirm her daughter was alive. What aren't you telling me? Lauren said. Something shifted in his face. Respect, maybe, or the recognition of it. The building where the apartment is. He said it evenly. I live there, penthouse. He held up one hand before she could speak. I'm telling you now because security in that building is extremely tight and I oversee it personally. If you live there, you'll be safe. You'll also be in a building where I can ensure that safety directly. That sounds like a polite way of saying you'll be watching us. It's a direct way of saying I'll keep you protected. There's a difference. His voice was flat and certain. I'm not interested in controlling your life, Lauren. I'm interested in making sure you and your daughter aren't caught in the middle of a war that has nothing to do with you. Emma was very still beside her. Lauren could feel her daughter's attention, the specific quality of Emma's hope, cautious and desperate and trying so hard not to show itself. She looked around the apartment, at the cracked plaster above the window, at the bathroom door still open behind them, at the hole in the frosted glass that was letting cold air in. I have conditions, she heard herself say. He waited. The work is legitimate, all of it. If anything comes across my desk that doesn't look right, I walk away. No pressure, no questions. That's non-negotiable. She held his gaze. And Emma stays completely separate from whatever else you do. She's not involved, she's not exposed, she doesn't even know the details. She's a 15-year-old kid who wants to study architecture, and she gets to just be that. Agreed. No hesitation, not even a pause. And the apartment. She made herself say the rest of it clearly, even with Emma sitting right there. We're employees in company housing. That's the entire arrangement, nothing more. His eyes went cold in a way that was somehow reassuring. I'm not that kind of man. He said it once. He didn't repeat it or soften it or add anything to it. Just those 5 words, laid out flat and final. She believed him. She didn't have an explanation for why. She knew almost nothing about this man, and what she did know should have made her far more careful, not less. But she believed him. And she was tired. She was so tired of making every decision alone, of doing every calculation alone, of looking at every threat alone, while also looking at everything that needed doing, and everything Emma needed, and all of it landing on her and only her. Monday morning, she said, we'll be ready. He stood. I'll send people to pack and transport your belongings. You don't need to do anything except be here. He looked at Emma. There's a good school 3 blocks from the building. PS 261. I've had my assistant begin the transfer paperwork. You'd start next week. Emma's face did something complicated. Surprise and hope, and the careful management of both. Thank you, she said, in a voice that was trying to hold too many things at once. He nodded once, then looked at Lauren a final time, and she still couldn't fully read his expression. And she was starting to think that was intentional, that unreadability was something he'd learned to maintain the way other people learned to smile on command. "Pack what matters to you," he said. "The furniture here isn't worth moving. The new place is furnished." Then he was gone, his men folding in behind him like a tide going out, and the apartment felt suddenly very quiet in their absence. Emma turned to her. Her eyes were wide and bright, and fighting hard against something that looked a lot like tears. "Are we really leaving?" Lauren looked at the hole in the bathroom window, looked at the deadbolt on the front door, looked at her daughter's face, pale and exhausted, and 15 years old and so much braver than she should have had to be. "Monday morning," she said, "we start over. Do you trust him?" Lauren thought about a park bench in the rain, about a coat draped over her daughter's shoulders, about a card with no name that she'd put behind her driver's license because some part of her had known, even then, that she was going to need it. She thought about the way Dominic Caruso had looked at that bullet hole in her bathroom window and gone so still and so cold that the air in the room had changed temperature. "I trust that he'll keep us safe," she said. "Right now, that's enough." Emma leaned against her shoulder. Outside, sirens were still circling. The hole in the bathroom window let in a thin, cold draft. And 2 days later, when the men arrived with coffee and careful hands and moving equipment, Lauren stood in the middle of the apartment that had been her life for 3 years and felt nothing but ready. The men arrived Monday at 7:45 with coffee and quiet efficiency, and by 10 o'clock everything Lauren and Emma owned that was worth keeping was in a van heading south toward Manhattan. 3 boxes, 2 suitcases, the sum total of 3 years of surviving in a place that had never felt like home, packed up in under 2 hours by strangers who handled their secondhand books and worn linens with more care than the objects probably deserved. Emma carried Dominic's coat herself. She wouldn't let anyone else touch it. Lauren didn't say anything about that. She understood it. The drive to the West Village took 40 minutes through Monday morning traffic, and Lauren spent most of it watching the city change outside the window. The Bronx giving way to Upper Manhattan, giving way to the kind of neighborhood she used to walk through quickly when she had errands in the area. The kind where the buildings were maintained, and the trees were old, and the sidewalks didn't have anything growing through the cracks. Emma had her forehead pressed to the glass and hadn't spoken since they got in the car, and Lauren left her alone because sometimes the only thing to do with a feeling that big was sit inside it until it found its own shape. The building was on a quiet corner, red brick, iron balconies, the kind of structure that had been built when people still believed buildings should look like they intended to stay. The doorman greeted them by name. The elevator was smooth. The hallway on the 8th floor was clean and still, and nothing like the hallway they'd left behind. Lauren put the key in the lock and pushed the door open. Light hit her first. Actual, abundant, unobstructed natural light pouring through windows that were large enough to matter. She stood in the doorway for a full 3 seconds just breathing it in, and Emma pushed past her and stopped in the middle of the living room and turned around once slowly, taking in the cream walls and the real furniture and the windows and the trees visible through the glass. Then Emma saw the bedrooms. "Mom," her voice was barely audible. "There are 2 of them." "I know. I have my own room." Emma walked to the doorway of the smaller bedroom and put her hand on the doorframe. "With a door that closes." Lauren's throat closed up entirely. She pressed her fingers to her mouth and stood there, and Emma turned around and saw her face and started crying too. And they stood in that hallway crying over a door that closed, which was possibly the most absurd and most true thing Lauren had experienced in years. The movers finished bringing up the boxes and pretended with great professionalism not to notice 2 women coming apart over basic square footage and functional appliances. By noon, the boxes were unpacked. By 1 o'clock, Emma had arranged her books on the shelves and her sketchbooks on the desk and was lying on her bed staring at the ceiling with the expression of someone who kept expecting the whole thing to dissolve. Lauren made lunch from the groceries that had been stocked in the refrigerator. She hadn't asked who arranged that, and the not asking was its own kind of answer about how quickly she was adapting to a world where things simply appeared when they were needed. They ate at the kitchen table by the window. Neither of them said much. Neither of them needed to. Dominic knocked at 3. He stood in the hallway in a dark gray suit with a leather folder under his arm, and Lauren stepped aside to let him in and felt the particular strangeness of having him in her space. Her actual space, not a park or a crumbling Bronx stairwell, but the place where her coffee mug was already in the cabinet and Emma's jacket was on the hook by the door. "The apartment is perfect," Lauren said. "Thank you. This is business." He set the folder on the kitchen table and opened it with the efficiency of someone who had done this exact things many times. "The paperwork formalizes your employment and the housing arrangement. Everything is above board. You can have a lawyer review it if you prefer." "I'll review it myself." She sat down across from him. "I've translated enough contracts to know what I'm reading." Something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "I know you have." He walked her through the documents one by one. Employment contract with Caruso provisions. Position as primary translator and international correspondence manager. $3,000 monthly, transferred to her account on the 1st of each month. Health insurance effective after 90 days. The apartment registered as company housing, her name on the lease. "Diane Voss is my business coordinator," he said, sliding a card across the table. "She'll manage your assignments. You'll hear from her tomorrow morning." Emma had drifted out of her room during the paperwork review and was now leaning in her doorway, watching with the careful, neutral expression she wore when she was paying close attention and didn't want anyone to know it. Dominic looked at her. "There's a school 3 blocks north, PS 261. The transfer paperwork is underway. You'll need to complete enrollment in person, but you can start by the end of the week if you want." Emma blinked. "You already did the paperwork?" "Diane handled it." He paused. "It's a good school. Strong math program." Emma looked at Lauren. Lauren looked at Emma. Something passed between them that didn't require words. "Thank you," Emma said. It was the same 2 words she'd said in the park, in the rain, holding a white handkerchief. But this time there was more underneath them. More weight, more history, more of the specific gratitude you feel when someone treats your ordinary life like it matters. Dominic nodded once. He looked at Lauren. "Sign when you're ready. No pressure on timing." She picked up the pen and signed. He collected the documents, stood, and moved toward the door with the same quiet authority he brought to every room he was in. At the threshold, he paused, almost as an afterthought, though Lauren was starting to understand that nothing Dominic Caruso did was an afterthought. "If you have any issues with the apartment, you can contact the building superintendent or call me directly." "I have your number," Lauren said. "Yes." His eyes held hers for a moment. That measuring quality again. That careful assessment she still couldn't fully decode. "You do." Then he was gone. Emma came fully out of her room the moment the door closed. "He already did my school paperwork." "I noticed. Before we even moved in." "Emma, I'm just saying," she held up both hands. "I'm just noting that for the record." The week that followed had a rhythm Lauren hadn't felt in years. Diane's email arrived Tuesday at 8 sharp. Professional, warm, practical, attaching a commercial contract from a Tuscan wine producer with formatting notes and a terminology reference. Lauren completed it in 4 hours. Diane's response came before Lauren had finished her second cup of coffee. The Milan partners had specifically requested her for their account going forward. She read that line 3 times. Thursday brought an olive oil supplier contract from Sicily. Friday brought a request to handle all correspondence with a textile importer in Florence. The work was real, genuinely complex, genuinely demanding, and for the first time in longer than she could calculate, Lauren was using her full capacity instead of grinding through whatever underpaid job she could find at midnight. The money hit her account at the end of the week, the right amount, on time, no chasing. She stood in her kitchen on Friday afternoon and did the math on what she'd earned that week and felt something she barely recognized. Enough. She had enough. Emma started at PS 261 on Thursday and came home talking about a girl named Sienna who sat next to her in history, and a math teacher who actually explained things instead of just moving through material, and a library that had books she'd been wanting to read for 2 years. Lauren listened to all of it and felt something shift behind her sternum, quiet and warm and almost unbearable in its simplicity. Dominic started appearing. Tuesday, he knocked to check a radiator that Lauren was fairly certain was functioning perfectly. Wednesday, water pressure. Thursday, window seals. Each visit was 10 or 15 minutes. Each visit was accompanied by a legitimate-sounding reason that neither of them fully believed. He sat at the kitchen table while he explained whatever maintenance issue he'd invented, and he talked to Emma about her sketchbooks, and he asked Lauren questions about her work that showed he'd actually read the contracts she translated. On Friday evening, Lauren was getting mail in the lobby when she heard the elevator open behind her and turned to find Dominic with grocery bags from an Italian market 3 blocks over, looking briefly surprised to see her, which she was almost certain was not genuine. "The market on Grove Street," he said, as though the conversation had already been going on for several minutes. "They import actual Italian products, real Parmigiano Reggiano, proper cured meats. You can't cook anything that matters without starting with the right ingredients." "You cook?" The question came out before she could stop it. "When I have time." He shifted the bags. "My mother was from Naples. She considered cooking a moral obligation. You must miss her. Every day." He said it simply, without the performance of grief. "She died 6 years ago, cancer." He paused. "She would have liked you. She respected people who didn't give up." Lauren stood holding her mail and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say to that wouldn't sound like either too much or not enough. "There's an Italian restaurant 2 blocks east," Dominic said. "Trattoria Romana. Family-owned, actual Roman cuisine. The cacio e pepe is the best in the city." "I love cacio e pepe." The admission felt strangely intimate. "When I was in college, I spent a semester in Florence. I lived on cacio e pepe and carbonara for 4 months." Something sparked in his face. Real interest, unguarded, the first completely unmanaged expression she'd seen from him. "You studied in Florence?" "Junior year, translation program." She found herself smiling despite herself. "Best 4 months of my life." "What stopped you from going back?" "Reality." She said it without bitterness, because the bitterness had been worn smooth by repetition. Single mother, financial obligations, a daughter who needed stability. He looked at her for a moment. Dreams don't have to stay dreams forever. Sometimes circumstances change. The air between them did something she wasn't ready to name. She shifted her weight. "I should let you go before your groceries get warm." "Right." He picked up the bags but didn't move toward the elevator. "Have dinner with me." He said it without preamble, without performance. Not a radiator inspection, an actual dinner, somewhere with a dress code and a wine list, where we can have a real conversation. Lauren looked at him. "You've been inventing maintenance issues to knock on my door." "Diane told me it was obvious and I should stop." His mouth curved slightly. "She was right. So, Monday night, I'll pick you up at 7. She should have said no. She knew she should have said no. The power imbalance alone, the complexity alone, the sheer number of things she didn't know about this man alone, all of it argued for no. And she stood in that lobby with her mail and her better judgment and said, "Monday night, 7. She turned and went back to the elevator before she could change her mind. Upstairs, Emma was at the kitchen table with her sketchbooks. She looked up at Lauren's face and went very still. What happened? Nothing. Lauren set down her mail. I'm having dinner with Dominic on Monday. Emma's pencil stopped moving. Like a dinner? Don't. I'm not doing anything, but she was smiling, and it was the real kind. The one Lauren hadn't seen enough of in 3 years. The one that reached her eyes and made her look like the kid she was supposed to still be. Mom, Emma, you're allowed to be happy. Her daughter said it simply, the way teenagers sometimes said the most important things. Without armor, without hedging, just straight out. You're allowed to let someone be good to you. Lauren sat down across from her, looked at the sketchbooks full of buildings Emma had been drawing since she was 9, at the new school bag hanging on the back of her chair, at the window behind her that showed trees and streetlights, in a neighborhood where the sidewalks were clear and the lights all worked. She thought about a man who had done her school transfer paperwork before they'd even moved in, who had stocked the refrigerator, who checked radiators that didn't need checking so he had a reason to sit at her kitchen table for 15 minutes. It's complicated, Lauren said. Everything worth having is, Emma said, and went back to her drawing. Lauren sat there for a long moment, thinking about Florence and Cacio e Pepe, and the way Dominic had said her mother would have liked you, without flinching, without calculation, just as a fact he was offering her. Then she got up and started making dinner, and told herself Monday was 4 days away, and she had time to decide exactly what she was walking into. She didn't need 4 days. She'd already decided in the lobby. She just wasn't ready to say so yet. Monday arrived the way important days always did, faster than Lauren was ready for, and slower than her nerves could stand. She spent Sunday night telling herself it was just dinner, just a conversation with her employer in a restaurant that happened to have a dress code. Completely ordinary, professional even. She repeated this to herself while staring at the inside of her closet for 20 minutes, which contained 3 pairs of jeans, 4 work shirts, and 1 dress she'd bought for a cousin's wedding 4 years ago. Wine-colored, simple, still fit. She took it out and put it back twice before Emma appeared in the doorway with the expression of someone who had been listening to this internal crisis from the next room. Wear the dress, Emma said, with the black boots, the ones with the small heel. It's 4 years old. It's classic. There's a difference. Emma came in and sat on the bed. And wear your hair down. You always pull it back when you're nervous. I'm not nervous. Emma said nothing. This was somehow worse than if she'd argued. Lauren wore the dress. She wore it with the black boots and her hair down, and the small silver earrings that had been her mother's. And when she looked in the bathroom mirror, she didn't look like a woman performing a version of herself. She looked, for the first time in a long time, like someone who was allowed to take up space. Dominic knocked at exactly 7. Dark blue suit, perfectly fitted, the kind of put together that looked effortless and wasn't. He looked at her for 2 full seconds before he said anything, and what he said was, "You look beautiful." Quiet and direct, no performance in it. "You clean up reasonably well yourself," Lauren said, and grabbed her coat before the moment could become more than she was ready for. Emma was grinning from the kitchen doorway. Lauren pointed at her without looking back. Not a word. "I wasn't going to say anything." Emma's voice was pure innocence. "Have fun." The restaurant was everything Lauren had expected and still managed to be more. Corner table, low lighting, the kind of place where the waitstaff moved like they'd been choreographed. Dominic ordered wine in flawless Italian without looking at the list and spoke briefly to the sommelier about a vintage with the ease of someone for whom this was simply Tuesday. And Lauren watched it all and felt the gap between their worlds with a clarity that was almost uncomfortable. "Relax," he said, once the sommelier had gone. "It's dinner. It's dinner in a place where the menu doesn't have prices. That's a design choice, not a statement." He looked at her steadily. "You've been in rooms like this before. Florence wasn't all student cafeterias. Florence was 20 years ago, and someone else was paying." She picked up her wine glass. I'm just locating myself accurately in the situation. Where are you locating yourself? Across from a man who controls city blocks and breaks wrists without sweating, in a restaurant that probably has a 6-week waiting list, wearing a 4-year-old dress. She said it without apology. I'm being accurate. Something moved through his expression. Not amusement exactly, but close. The dress is doing fine, and accuracy is something I respect. He set down his glass. Ask me what you actually want to ask. She looked at him. Then, what exactly is your business, Dominic? The parts that aren't olive oil. The question landed between them and he didn't flinch, didn't redirect, didn't smile his way past it. He was quiet for exactly long enough that she understood he was deciding how honest to be, not whether to be honest at all. Territory management, he said finally. Resource allocation. Protection arrangements in areas where official protection is unreliable or absent. There are aspects that exist in legal gray areas. I won't dress that up for you. You're talking about organized crime. I'm talking about filling power vacuums that would otherwise be filled by people with far fewer rules. He held her gaze. I have lines I don't cross. That's not nothing, even if it's not enough to make it clean. Lauren sat with that for a moment. The food arrived. She barely noticed what it was, and she ate a few bites without tasting them, turning his words over. Do you want me to know the details? No, he said it before she finished the question. The legitimate businesses are real. That's your world. The rest is mine. And those worlds don't cross. Not for you, not for Emma. His voice went flat and certain on that. You have my word. She put her fork down. Anthony told me, your consigliere, Marcus, whatever his actual title is. I haven't introduced you to Marcus. No, she paused. But I'm telling you what I'd ask him if I could. She looked directly at him. How many people depend on you keeping everything together? How much would fall apart if you made a different choice? He was very still. Why are you asking that? Because I'm trying to understand if this, she gestured between them, is something you're actually free to want, or if it's something you're allowing yourself as a reward for everything else you carry. The silence that followed was the longest one he'd given her, and in it she saw something she hadn't expected. Not calculation, but something closer to being caught. Like she'd named something he hadn't put into words yet. That, he said quietly, is a more precise question than anyone has asked me in years. Is that a non-answer? It's an honest answer that I'm still working out. He reached across the table, not touching her hand, just his fingers resting near hers on the tablecloth. What I know is that since November, I've sat through 3 meetings that I used to consider unmissable and couldn't tell you what was decided, because I was thinking about a conversation we'd had in a lobby about cacio e pepe. He paused. That's either a problem or an answer. I haven't decided which. Lauren looked at his hand near hers. She thought about Emma saying, you're allowed to let someone be good to you. And she thought about 3 years of every decision landing entirely on her own shoulders. And she thought about the specific loneliness of being competent and alone, and how those two things had become so thoroughly fused that she'd stopped being able to tell where one ended and the other began. She didn't move her hand away. They walked back in November cold, close enough that their arms touched at intervals neither of them was pretending was accidental. At the building entrance, he stopped and looked at her, and she looked back, and the streetlight cast everything in gold and shadow, and she could feel exactly where this was going, and she let it go there right up until the moment his face was close enough that she could have closed the remaining distance without trying. She stepped back. Her hand came up between them. Not yet, she said. I need more time with this. He dropped back immediately. No argument, no pressure, no wounded silence. I understand. He said it and meant it, which was somehow the most disarming thing he'd done yet. You're being very patient. I'm being selfish. His voice was low. I want you to choose this. Not just accept it because I'm standing in front of you and it's convenient. I want you to actually choose it. He held the door open. Take whatever time you need. I'll be here. She went upstairs with her heart doing things she hadn't given it permission to do, and Emma was still awake pretending to read, and took one look at Lauren's face and grinned with her whole body. Lauren sat beside her on the couch and said, "It was good. Really complicated, but good," and left it at that. The 3 weeks that followed had the particular quality of something building, slow and deliberate and inevitable. The way a storm builds on a clear day when you can feel the pressure changing in the air. Dominic stopped inventing maintenance reasons to knock and started simply appearing when he had an actual reason. Dinner 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes with Emma there, sometimes without. He helped Emma with her architecture homework with a seriousness that made her glow. Real questions, real engagement, treating her ideas like they were worth taking seriously. He left a book on architectural theory on the kitchen counter one Wednesday with a sticky note that said the Cooper Union summer program has applications open. You'd be good at this. Emma cried and pretended she hadn't. Lauren's salary moved to $4,000 monthly, then to $5,000, as Diane expanded her responsibilities across all European communications. She researched Columbia's literary translation master's program late at night after Emma was asleep, telling herself she was just looking, just checking, not actually considering. She bookmarked the application page. She told herself that meant nothing. It was a Thursday, almost 11 at night. Emma was asleep. Lauren was at the kitchen table finishing a contract, the apartment quiet and warm in the way that had taken her weeks to trust. She was almost done with the last paragraph when she heard it in the hallway. Shouting. Male. Loud. With the specific edge of alcohol underneath it. Not aggression building, but aggression already arrived. And then her name, muffled to the door, but unmistakable. "Lauren! Lauren, I know you're in there. Open the door." She went completely still. Ryan, her ex-husband, the man who had emptied their joint account at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning 3 years ago while she was dropping Emma at school, who had left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I can't do this anymore," and vanished so completely that the Child Support Enforcement Agency had stopped trying to locate him after 14 months. Standing in her hallway, drunk, pounding on her door. "You think you can just move somewhere nice and not share the wealth? I know about the fancy building, Lauren. Open the goddamn door." Emma appeared in her doorway, eyes wide, face white. "Stay in your room." Lauren's voice came out flat and certain. "Lock your door and don't come out." "Mom! Emma! Now!" She heard Emma's door close and the lock turn, and she was already dialing. One contact, the one she'd moved to the top of her favorites 3 weeks ago without making a conscious decision to do it. Dominic answered before the second ring. "Lauren, Ryan is here." She kept her voice low and level, even as her ex-husband continued his muffled tirade on the other side of the door. "My ex-husband, he's drunk, and he's in the hallway, and I don't know how he got into the building, and I'm coming." No hesitation, no questions. 2 minutes, do not open the door. The line went dead. Ryan kept talking, about money, about her rich boyfriend, about rights and fairness and how she owed him, the self-righteous logic of a man who had walked away from his family and was now aggrieved that the family had moved on without him. Lauren stood with her back against the wall beside the door and breathed and counted and listened for the elevator. She heard it at the 90-second mark. Then Dominic's voice, quiet and completely controlled, cutting through Ryan's monologue like a blade through water. "You need to leave." Ryan's voice changed immediately, startled, then belligerent. "Who the hell are you? This is between me and my wife." Ex-wife. One word. Colder than the November they'd first met in. "And you're going to walk away from this door right now." "I have rights. She has my kid in there, and I have legal rights." "You haven't exercised those rights in 3 years. Dominic's voice dropped even further, which somehow made it more present, more certain. You abandoned your daughter. You abandoned your wife. You emptied a bank account and disappeared. And now you're standing in a hallway making noise about what you're owed. A pause. You have two choices. Lauren cracked the door 2 inches. She could see them. Ryan in a jacket she didn't recognize, slightly too large for him, his face flushed. Dominic in the clothes he'd been wearing at dinner earlier. He must have come straight from his penthouse, with 2 of his men flanking him at the precise distance that communicated everything without requiring words. Choice 1, Dominic said, $20,000, cash, tonight, in exchange for legal documents you'll sign tomorrow, formal renunciation of parental rights, binding agreement of no contact with Lauren or Emma, permanent, enforceable. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. Choice 2, you decline, and I handle this differently. And I promise you, Ryan, you do not want choice 2. Ryan stared at the envelope. His mouth worked. That's my daughter in there. You haven't called her in 37 months. Dominic's voice didn't change. I know because I checked. You don't get to say that word to me. Something went out of Ryan's face. The bluster, the alcohol confidence, the righteous anger, all of it just drained away, leaving something smaller and more accurate underneath. He looked at Dominic and then at the 2 men and then at the envelope, and Lauren watched him make the only calculation he'd ever been reliably good at, the one about his own safety. He took the envelope. My attorney will contact you tomorrow with the documents, Dominic said. The money is yours when they're signed and notarized. If you contact Lauren or Emma before then, or after, for any reason, he let the sentence end there. He didn't need to finish it. Do you understand? Ryan nodded once, the way a man nods when he's trying to preserve the last shred of dignity available to him. Then he turned and walked to the stairs without looking back, and Lauren watched him go and felt something she hadn't expected. Not relief, not anger, not grief, just a clean, definitive closing. The sound of a door finally shutting properly after 3 years of banging in the wind. She opened the door fully. Dominic turned and looked at her, and the cold was still in his face, but underneath it she could see something else. The question he wasn't asking out loud, the one that only required her face to answer. She nodded. I'm okay. He exhaled. Behind her, Emma's door opened. Her daughter came down the hallway in her pajamas, her face carrying the particular aftermath of fear that Lauren knew well by now. The pale skin, the slightly too careful movement, the eyes that were checking everything twice. Emma looked at Dominic standing in the doorway, and then something happened that Lauren would think about for a long time afterward. Emma crossed the apartment and put her arms around him, not tentatively, not politely, the way you hug someone you trust completely, both arms and her face against his shoulder, the way she used to hug Lauren when she was small and scared and the world had gotten too large. Dominic went still for 1 second, that beat of someone receiving something they weren't prepared for, and then he put one hand on the back of her head and held on, and his eyes over Emma's shoulder found Lauren's, and what was in them was something Lauren had no immediate word for. It wasn't complicated. It was the opposite of complicated. It was just a man holding a frightened child, and the child trusting him enough to let herself be held. He's not coming back, Dominic said quietly to Emma's hair. I made sure. You're safe. Emma nodded against his shoulder. She didn't let go for a long time. Lauren stood in her own doorway watching this and felt the last wall she'd been maintaining inside herself. The careful, pragmatic, sensible structure she'd built to keep hope at a manageable distance quietly come down. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a gentle, inevitable settling, like a door finally finding its frame. She crossed the room and put her hand on Dominic's arm. He looked at her, and what had been complicated for weeks suddenly wasn't. Stay, she said, just for a little while. Have coffee. Don't go back upstairs yet. He stayed. He stayed until nearly 1 in the morning, not doing anything significant, just sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, while Emma fell asleep on the couch wrapped in a blanket, and Lauren sat across from him and let the adrenaline of the night find its way out of her system slowly, the way it had to, without rushing it. They talked about small things, Diane's latest batch of supplier contracts, a restaurant in the West Village that had recently started importing cheese from a producer in Sardinia that Dominic had known for 15 years. Whether Emma's Cooper Union application deadline was hard or soft. Normal things. Deliberately, carefully normal. When he finally stood to leave, he looked at Emma sleeping on the couch, her face slack and young and unguarded, the way it only was when she was fully under. And something moved through his expression that Lauren had no precise name for. It wasn't sentiment exactly. It was more like recognition, like he was seeing something he'd been looking for without knowing he was looking. "She's going to be fine," he said quietly. "I know." Lauren walked him to the door. "Thank you, for tonight, for all of it." He turned in the doorway and looked at her directly, the way he always did, the way that still managed to feel like the first time. "You called me. I called you. That matters to me." He said it simply, the way he said things that were true without requiring decoration. "More than you probably realize." She held his gaze. "I'm starting to realize quite a bit." He left. She locked the door and stood with her forehead resting against it for a moment, breathing. And then she went and covered Emma more carefully with the blanket and turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. For the first time since November, she fell asleep before she'd finished the thought she was thinking. The following week, Marcus Cole called her. She didn't know how he'd gotten her number, and she didn't ask, because the answer would have been obvious, and she'd made her peace with Dominic's world being one where certain things simply happened without requiring explanation. Marcus was in his 50s, sharp and careful in equal measure, and he invited her to lunch at a small Italian restaurant in Tribeca with the matter-of-fact warmth of someone who had decided the meeting was necessary and saw no point in being indirect about it. She went. He was already at the table when she arrived, stood when she came in, shook her hand with the gravity of someone for whom manners were a form of respect rather than performance. They ordered, made brief small talk about the neighborhood, and then Marcus put down his fork and looked at her with the assessing quality she was starting to recognize as a Caruso-adjacent trait. "He's different," Marcus said, "since you came into his life." Lauren kept her face even. "Different how?" "Lighter, more patient." Marcus turned his wineglass once. "He's delegating responsibilities he's held personally for 6 years. He left a meeting early last Tuesday because you'd mentioned Emma's enrollment appointment, and he wanted to make sure the paperwork had processed correctly." He paused. "I've known Dominic for 22 years. He has never left a meeting early." Lauren didn't say anything. "Isabella was his wife," Marcus said. He watched her face when he said it. 4 years ago. Car accident, drunk driver. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. After that, he closed himself off so completely that I genuinely worried about him. Not about the business ran fine. About him. His voice was measured, but the feeling underneath it was old and real. "You brought him back. I wanted you to know that from someone who watched him disappear." "Marcus," Lauren set down her own fork, "why are you telling me this? Because you're smart enough to be afraid of what he is. And I don't want that fear to make you run from something that's genuinely good for both of you." He said it plainly, without apology. And because Dominic would never say any of this himself, he'd consider it leverage, and he doesn't want to leverage you into anything. So I'm saying it instead, as someone who has no agenda except watching that man have an actual life again. She sat with that for a long moment. The restaurant moved around them, plates arriving at other tables, conversations at the edges of her hearing, And she thought about a park bench in November rain and how far they'd all traveled from that night. "He's thinking about stepping back," she said, "from the other operations, isn't he?" Marcus looked at her with something that might have been surprise on a less controlled face. "He told you that?" "He mentioned it was structurally possible. Once." She met his eyes. "He doesn't know I've been thinking about it since." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes, he's thinking about it. More seriously than I've heard him think about anything personal in 4 years." He picked up his fork again. "I thought you should know that too." She drove home with the city moving past her windows and Marcus's words sitting in her chest like something she needed time to arrange properly. Not because they changed anything, because they confirmed things she'd been carefully not confirming for weeks, holding at a slight distance so they couldn't become hope before she was ready for them to be hope. She was ready. That evening, Dominic came for dinner. Emma had made the table look intentional. Their good plates, the cloth napkins they'd bought at a West Village market 3 weeks ago, the candle from the cabinet where Lauren kept things she considered almost too nice to use. He noticed. He didn't comment on it, but the corner of his mouth moved in the way it did when he was registering something that mattered to him. Lauren had made cacio e pepe from scratch, the real way, the way her host mother in Florence had taught her. The technique, the timing, the specific motion of the pan that kept the pecorino from clumping. Dominic watched her finish it at the stove with the focused attention he brought to things he genuinely respected. And when he tasted it, he set his fork down and looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Unguarded, completely, entirely unguarded. "Your host mother taught you well," he said. "She was very particular about technique." Lauren sat down across from him. "She said if you're going to do something simple, the simplicity has nowhere to hide, so you'd better do it right." "Smart woman," he looked at her. "She sounds like my mother." Emma talked through most of dinner. About Sienna, about a history project she was building that incorporated architectural analysis of civic buildings. About a teacher who had pulled her aside to say her essay had been the best in the class. She talked with the particular energy of someone who had forgotten, temporarily, to monitor how much space she was taking up. And the forgetting was so complete and so natural that Lauren felt something almost painfully sweet watching it. Dominic asked questions that proved he'd remembered every detail of every previous conversation. He argued gently with Emma's assessment of brutalist architecture, which launched a 10-minute debate that Emma won on points, and he conceded with evident pleasure. He refilled Lauren's wine without being asked, at the exact moment she would have reached for the bottle herself. After dinner, Emma excused herself, transparently, warmly, with a grin she aimed at the ceiling rather than at either of them, and the apartment settled into the specific quiet of two people who no longer needed to fill silence to justify their presence. "Marcus called me," Lauren said. Dominic went still. "When?" "This week. He took me to lunch." She watched his face. "He told me about Isabella." He was quiet for a long moment. Whatever he was moving through, he moved through it privately, the way he did everything private, without display, without performance. Then, he shouldn't have. "He was looking out for you, in his way." She kept her voice even. "You could be angry at him, or you could consider that he loves you and decided it was worth the risk." Dominic looked at her. Something in his face was very careful and very tired of being careful simultaneously. "What did he say?" "That you're different since November." She held his gaze. "That you left a meeting early because of Emma's enrollment paperwork." A pause. "That you haven't done anything like that in 4 years." He didn't deny it. "You're thinking about stepping back," she said, "from the other side of things." The silence stretched. Then, "Yes. Is that because of me?" "It's because of a lot of things." He looked down at his wine glass, and for a moment he looked like exactly what he was. A man who had been carrying an enormous weight for a very long time, and had recently, cautiously, started imagining what it might feel like to put it down. "You're part of it, the largest part," he looked up. "You and Emma." Lauren stood up from the table and crossed to the couch, and he followed without being asked, and they sat the way they'd learned to sit, close enough that the warmth was shared, but with the particular respect of two people who had been moving toward this carefully, without rushing. "I love you," she said. She said it straight out, the way he said things that were true, without preamble, without hedging, without the careful packaging that fear required. "I know the timing is complicated and your world is complicated, and I am fully aware that a rational person would probably need 6 more months to say that. But I've been translating what people mean from what they say for 9 years, and I know what I'm reading when I look at you." He went very still. "I love you," she said again, "and Emma loves you, in the way she has decided she's allowed to love someone who shows up and stays. And if you're thinking about what's possible, what could actually exist on the other side of a different choice, I want you to know that we're here. That's real. We're not going anywhere." He reached out and took her hand. Just that, her hand in both of his thumb moving slowly across her knuckles, and the steadiness of it was more eloquent than anything she'd heard from anyone in years. "I love you," he said. The words came out low and certain, like something he'd been holding in precisely the right shape for weeks and was now releasing. "I love you, and I love that girl in that room who argues about architecture and trusts me with her sketchbooks." He paused. "And I want to be the kind of man you deserve to love. That's the part I'm still working on." "You're already that man," Lauren said. "You became that man in a park in November when you stood up without being asked." He kissed her, slow and deliberate, both hands framing her face like she was something worth being careful with. And she kissed him back the same way, with all 3 years of exhaustion and resilience and the specific hard-won knowledge of someone who has survived enough to understand what isn't survivable. Who knows finally what's real and what's worth holding on to. From behind Emma's closed door, there was a small, muffled sound that was either a cough or the world's most poorly disguised expression of satisfaction. Lauren pulled back and pressed her lips together. Dominic looked at the door. His expression did the thing. Not quite a smile, but everything a smile was made of. "She's been awake for the last 20 minutes, he said. "I know. Should we be embarrassed?" "Absolutely not." Lauren leaned her head against his shoulder. "She's waited for this longer than we have." Spring arrived the way it always did in New York, suddenly, insistently, the city remembering overnight that warmth was possible. Emma's Cooper Union acceptance came on a Thursday afternoon. She screamed. Lauren screamed. Dominic, who had known the moment Diane forwarded him the preliminary notification 2 days earlier and had said nothing, stood in the kitchen doorway and watched the two of them fall apart with an expression of such uncomplicated satisfaction that Lauren had to look away before she started crying again. "You knew," Emma said, pointing at him, still breathless. "I had a feeling," he said. Emma launched herself at him, and he caught her the way he always did now, easily, completely, like it was the most natural thing in the world, which it had become. Lauren's Columbia acceptance came 6 days later. She sat with the email open on her screen for a full 5 minutes before she called anyone. She needed those 5 minutes to herself, to feel it without performance, without having to manage anyone else's reaction to her own joy. She thought about a kitchen table in the Bronx at midnight. She thought about a card with no name. She thought about the woman she'd been in November, running through rain toward a park she couldn't see, driven by nothing but love and refusal. She called Dominic. He arrived in 11 minutes. She showed him the screen. He read it and looked at her and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I knew the first time I read your translations." She laughed. "You did not. The Milan partners called Diane to ask specifically about you." He took the phone from her hand, looked at the acceptance email one more time, set it on the counter. "You've been good enough for this for a long time. You just needed the circumstances to catch up. She pulled him in and held on, both arms around him, her face against his neck, and he held her back with the solid, unwavering certainty that had been the first thing she'd recognized about him on a bench in November rain. That quality of someone who, once committed, does not waver. That evening, the three of them ate takeout on the living room floor because Emma declared it a celebration that deserved to be slightly chaotic. Her architecture sketches spread between the containers, the city outside going gold in the evening light. Dominic on the floor with his suit jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, trying to explain to Emma why a specific building's load-bearing structure was more interesting than it looked. And Emma arguing back with the specific confidence of someone who has been listened to enough to trust her own instincts. Lauren sat cross-legged watching them and felt the fullness of it. Not the absence of complication, because nothing real was without complication, but the presence of something that held. Something that had started in fear and run through a dark park in November rain and found, on the other side of all of it, this. Emma looked up from the sketches. Is this really our life now? Lauren looked at her daughter, looked at the man sitting on her living room floor, arguing about architecture with the seriousness he brought to everything that mattered to him. Looked at the Cooper Union letter on the coffee table, and the Columbia email still glowing on her laptop screen, and the takeout containers, and the city going quietly gold outside the window. In her wallet, behind her driver's license, a plain white card with no name and no title. Just 10 digits. The number she'd called twice when the world collapsed, and both times it had answered before the second ring. She had never needed to look at it again. She knew it by heart. Yeah, baby, she said, this is exactly our life. And it was.